Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight we're not drifting down the Nile, wandering a cobbled Renaissance street, or pausing beneath the vaults of a medieval cathedral. No, tonight we're stepping into a place where the air is never still, where brick dust mingles with cordite, and where winter feels less like season and more like a living thing pressing in on every side. This is Stalingrad in the winter of 1942, a city broken into rubble and ash, clinging to the edges of the Volga, held not by walls, but by the stubborn, starving men sent to die in them. You will be one of those men, a face in the ranks, a name on a paper that no one will remember, a conscript whose survival is measured not in days but in hours. Before we step onto the frozen streets, do me one small favour. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you listen to these in bed, consider using a pair of wireless sleep earbuds for enhanced immersion. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed for side sleepers. I've linked my favourite pair in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable, let's begin. Summer in 1942 does not feel like the summers you remember from before the war. The air is warm, yes, and the sky over your village still holds the same pale blue, but it is a thinner kind of season now. The light feels flatter and the quiet hum of insects is often broken by the thud of boots in the street, or the creak of wagons carrying sacks of grain away. You have work to do most days, though it is rarely the same from one week to the next. Some mornings you help unload sacks at the cooperative store. Other days you queue for bread yourself, clutching your ration card as the woman ahead of you counts her coupons twice over before handing them to the baker. The loaves are smaller than they were last year, and the crust is tougher, but no one says this aloud. On walls and fences, red posters fade slowly in the sun, their slogans still legible, exhortations to labour, to vigilance, to sacrifice for the motherland. The faces printed on them, broad-shouldered workers, fearless soldiers, seem to stare straight ahead, past you, into a horizon they are certain of. You have not felt certain about anything for a long time. You are young enough that people sometimes still call you boy, though the war has already taken men younger than you. In the evenings, you walk home from the store, past the central square, where a loudspeaker mounted on a pole delivers news and speeches in bursts of tinny static. Sometimes the voice announces a great victory, naming places you have never seen. Other times, it speaks of temporary withdrawals and regrouping of forces, which the older men listen to with narrowed eyes. The square smells faintly of coal smoke, even in summer, from the little stove inside the party office that never seems to go out. Beside it, the bulletin board displays photographs of local boys now in uniform, their names written neatly below. The list grows longer each month, though no one has yet said whether all of them are still alive. Your own life is a string of repetitive days. You eat what you can find, work where you're told, and sleep in the same narrow bed you have slept in since you were a child. The war exists mostly in the background here, a constant hum rather than a sharp interruption, though lately the hum has grown louder. Trains pass more often on the tracks at the edge of the village, their flat cars loaded with crates, barrels, and sometimes rows of soldiers sitting stiffly with their rifles resting against their knees. They rarely look at you when you wave. Once in a while, a train heading in the opposite direction rattles past carrying something covered in tarpaulins, damaged equipment perhaps, or things no one wishes to name. It happens on a day much like any other. The morning is warm, the air heavy with the scent of dust and sun on dry grass. You're at the far edge of the village, mending a fence with a neighbour, when you hear the sound of an engine. It is not a tractor or the usual delivery truck. This sound is heavier, the note of it more insistent. A military truck painted the dull green you have seen in photographs pulls into view along the road. In the back are two soldiers, their uniforms faded from wear, rifles slung casually over their shoulders. In the cab, another man in uniform leans out the window, scanning the roadside as if looking for someone in particular. The truck slows as it approaches, and you feel your hands still against the fence post without meaning to. The man in the passenger seat steps down before the truck even stops. He wears the red banded cap of an army official and carries a leather satchel under his arm. His boots are dusty, but his shirt is pressed and his voice, when he speaks, is brisk. He calls your name without hesitation, as though he has known it for years. The few villagers nearby pause their work and glance over. The official opens the satchel, pulls out a folded piece of paper, and reads from it in a clear, level tone. It is an order for you to report immediately for service in the Red Army. There is no explanation offered beyond the printed text. There does not need to be. The words are final, the signature at the bottom unshakable. You are to leave today. For a moment, you think there must be some mistake. You have never fired a rifle in your life, never worn a uniform, never been more than a few days' walk from here. But the official is already turning the paper for you to see, his finger tapping the line where your name appears. The other soldiers are watching with a kind of disinterested patience, as though this is simply another stop in a long day of errands. Behind them, the truck idles, its exhaust mixing with the warm air in a faint haze. You know, in the slow way that certainty settles in, that nothing you say will change what happens next. You nod once, not trusting yourself to speak, and the official tucks the paper back into his satchel. He tells you to be ready within the hour. Bring only what you can carry. Everything else will be issued. The phrase "everything else" lands strangely in your mind, but he is already stepping back into the truck, already giving a short wave to the driver. The vehicle rumbles a few meters down the road before stopping to speak to someone else. You stand there for a moment with the hammer still in your hand, looking at the fence you were repairing, the gap in it still unfilled. The neighbour mutters something you don't catch, his eyes fixed on the road. At home, your mother is in the yard hanging laundry. The white cloths snap faintly in the breeze, catching the sun. When she sees your face, she stops what she is doing. You tell her quickly, sparing the details because there is nothing to discuss. No appeal, no choice. She disappears inside without a word, and you hear drawers opening, the thump of a trunk lid. You go to your room and take down the small bag from the shelf. Into it go 2 shirts, a pair of socks, a dented tin cup, a bar of soap. On impulse, you add a small folding knife that belonged to your father, though you have no idea whether it will be allowed. The air inside the house feels different, as if the walls themselves know this is the last time you will walk between them. You avoid looking too long at familiar things, the chipped enamel kettle on the stove, the coat hanging by the door, the old photograph of your parents on the shelf, because each glance feels like a small wound. Your mother returns with a wrapped piece of bread and a scarf which she folds and presses into your hands. Her eyes are wet, but she does not cry. She only tells you to keep your head down and do as you're told. You nod again, though you're not sure you will remember how to do either. By the time you step outside, the truck is back. 2 other young men are already sitting in the rear, their bags at their feet, their faces carefully blank. One of them you recognise from the store, the other is from a farm further out. The soldiers make no move to help you up. You climb in on your own, the wood of the truck bed warm under your hands from the sun. Your mother stands a few steps back, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, the laundry still swaying gently behind her. You lift a hand, in a small wave. She nods once, holding your gaze until the truck lurches forward and the view of her begins to shrink. The road out of the village is the same one you have walked countless times, but from the bed of the truck, it feels like another place entirely. The houses pass in quick succession, then the fields, the distant line of trees. Some people pause their work to watch you go, leaning on tools or wiping their hands on their clothes, their expressions unreadable. you do not wave to them. The engine drones steadily, and the dust kicked up by the tyres drifts in through the open sides, settling on your bag, your hands, your face. You keep your eyes forward as the landscape you have known all your life falls away behind you. The truck does not take you far before the landscape begins to change, the low houses thinning out, the fences replaced by open stretches of grass and dirt tracks. In less than an hour, you see the dark line of the railway ahead, the rails glinting in the sun. The driver pulls up beside a squat smoke-streaked station building that looks as though it has been standing for decades without being cleaned. The air here smells of oil, coal dust, and something faintly metallic that seems to cling to the back of your throat. You are told to climb down, and the soldiers direct you and the other men toward the platform where more conscripts are already gathered. Some carry canvas sacks like yours. Others have bundles wrapped in blankets or worn overcoats tied into makeshift straps. Most are younger than you expected, though a few have lines around their eyes and the posture of men who have done hard work all their lives. A line of mixed freight and passenger cars waits at the platform, the locomotive at the far end, breathing out slow puffs of steam. The paint on the coaches is faded to a dull green, the metal edges rusted, the windows streaked with grime. When the order comes to board, there is no ceremony, just a pushing, shuffling movement toward the open doors. You're directed into a freight car with rough wooden benches along each side. The floor is covered in a thin layer of straw that crunches underfoot and smells faintly of mildew. There is a small stove bolted in one corner, but it is cold now. Men press in from both sides until there is no more space, and you find yourself wedged between two strangers, your bag on your knees. The door is slid shut, and for a moment the car is dim, except for the light filtering through a narrow crack near the roof. The train lurches forward with a deep metallic groan, the couplings clanging as each car is pulled into motion. The movement is uneven at first, swaying you against the men beside you, but soon it settles into a steady rhythm of wheels over rails. The sound is loud in the enclosed space, a constant clatter underlaid by the low hum of the engine up front. The air grows warmer quickly, heavy with the scent of unwashed bodies, wool, and the coal smoke drifting in from some unseen vent. A man across from you pulls a heel of bread from his pocket and begins to chew slowly, eyes on the floor. Another tucks his cap over his face and tries to sleep, though his shoulders keep jolting with the movement of the car. It does not take long for voices to rise over the noise of the wheels. At first, they are just short exchanges, men asking where each other comes from, how long they have been waiting for orders. But soon, you begin to hear the word Stalingrad pass from one end of the car to the other. Some speak it with the hard pride of a man already certain of victory, repeating phrases they have heard in speeches. They will never take it. Our stand will break them. Others speak lower, almost to themselves, recalling rumours of streets so full of rubble that tanks cannot pass, of houses fought over room by room, of the Volga running dark with oil and blood. The mood shifts back and forth like the sway of the carriage, one moment filled with determination, the next weighted with unease. A man near the door claims to have been in the city a month earlier, delivering supplies before being called up. He talks about the factories, the Red October, the barricade, still working in spite of the shells, the workers assembling weapons within sight of the front lines. Someone else interrupts to ask if the civilians are still there, and the man shrugs. Some, he says, those who haven't starved or been killed. His voice is flat, and no one presses further. You watch the faces around you as they listen, some intent, some blank, a few twisting in discomfort, as if the air inside the car has grown even closer. Hours pass with only the sound of the train and the occasional cough or scrape of a boot. Your legs begin to ache from holding the same position, and your hands feel stiff where they grip your bag. From time to time, the door slides open just enough for a soldier to pass in a pail of water or a bundle of bread. The bread is hard and dry, and by the time it reaches your end of the car, only small pieces remain. You take one without complaint and chew it slowly, feeling it scrape your mouth. The water is passed in a dented metal cup, each man taking a swallow before handing it on. By the time it reaches you, it is warm and carries a faint taste of tin. The train stops briefly at small stations along the way, but the doors to your car remain closed. Through the narrow crack above, you sometimes catch a glimpse of the platform, a length of warped boards, a sign with peeling paint, a few people standing to watch the train go by. In some places, soldiers with rifles slung across their chests patrol the edge of the platform, their faces turned toward the passing cars. Once, you see a group of women waving scarves and calling out, but their voices are swallowed by the clatter of the wheels before you can hear the words. By late afternoon, the air in the car is thick enough that breathing feels like work. Sweat runs down your back, despite the heat outside having begun to fade. Men shift in their seats, knees knocking together, boots scuffing the floor. A card game starts in one corner, the players using a crate as a table. Others lean against the walls with their eyes closed, lips moving faintly in murmured prayers or private thoughts. The rhythm of the train becomes a kind of backdrop to everything, an unbroken pulse that keeps time even as the day begins to blur into evening. As night approaches, the temperature drops sharply. Someone manages to get the small stove lit, and a little warmth seeps into the air nearest to it, though it never reaches far. Those closest hunch over it, holding out their hands while the rest pull their coats tighter or wrap scarves around their necks. You try to rest, but the benches are too narrow to lie down, and there is nowhere to stretch your legs. The man beside you eventually slumps against your shoulder, his breath slow and even. You let him stay. Moving him would mean losing what little comfort you have found in the small space left for yourself. In the dark, the voices change. Conversations are slower now, quieter. Someone hums a few bars of a song you half recognize, but it fades before you can place it. You hear the scrape of boots on the straw as men shift in search of a better position. The smell of coal smoke is stronger now, mixing with the damp wool of coats and the faint sourness of bodies that have been too long without washing. Your eyes close, but sleep comes in fragments, a few minutes at a time before the jolt of the carriage or a sudden shout from outside pulls you back. When dawn comes, the light is grey and cold, the stove has gone out, and your breath fogs faintly in the air. The man beside you rubs his eyes and straightens his cap without looking at you. Someone passes down another bundle of bread, and this time you are quick enough to take a larger piece. The taste is no better, but it fills your mouth and quiets the empty feeling in your stomach. Outside, the landscape has changed. The fields are flatter now, stretching toward the horizon without trees to break the line. The grass is shorter, the earth darker, and here and there you see the remains of wooden fences collapsed into the soil. The day passes much like the one before. The car rocks steadily, and the voices around you rise and fall with the motion. A few men speak again of Stalingrad, but more often now the name is avoided, as if not saying it might keep it farther away. Instead they talk about home, about wives, sisters and mothers, about the food they miss, about the smell of their own beds. You listen without joining in, unsure whether speaking of such things will make them seem closer or impossibly far away. By late afternoon the air changes again. There is a faint sharpness to it now, a smell that is neither coal nor dust. You notice it first as a trace, then stronger, until you're certain it is smoke, but not the smoke of the train. It carries something heavier, more bitter, as though it has clung to burning metal and wet stone. Others notice it too, glancing toward the crack above the door, though no one says much. The sky outside the narrow gap is beginning to lose its colour, shading toward the deepening tones of evening. The train begins to slow. The steady rhythm of the wheels falters, replaced by the groan of brakes and the squeal of metal on metal. You shift on the bench to peer toward the front, but the view is too narrow to see far. Then as the car rounds a bend, the light changes, the muted tones of dusk replaced by an orange glare. It flickers against the walls of the car, casting shifting shadows across the men inside. You realise it is not the sun you're seeing, but something else entirely. The glow of a fire so large it seems to stain the horizon. Through the gap you catch a glimpse of black smoke curling upward into the darkening sky. Somewhere ahead, the city is already burning, and you're still moving towards it. The train finally shudders to a stop beside what must once have been a small freight yard. The platform here is cracked and uneven, and a third of it has collapsed into a pit where the earth has been blasted away. There is no sign of civilians, only men in uniform moving quickly along the tracks, their faces set, their boots crunching over gravel and debris. A sergeant yanks the sliding door open, the daylight spilling into the dim interior. He shouts for you to get out, his tone not unkind but carrying no space for delay. The men in your car shuffle forward, stiff from the long ride, some nearly stumbling as they drop down to the ground. You are herded across the yard toward a row of battered buildings, some with their roofs partially collapsed, others leaning at strange angles as though a strong wind might finish what the shelling started. Near the largest of these structures, a line has formed. At a table under a sagging awning, 2 clerks sit with stacks of papers, a box of pens, and a single ink pot between them. They wear standard-issue uniforms, but no insignia, their sleeves rolled to the elbow in the late heat. One calls out a name, the other scratches it onto a form, and the man in front of you is waved to a second line where a pile of gear sits in no particular order. When it is your turn, the clerk barely glances up from his paper. He asks for your name, repeats it without expression, then pushes you toward the gear pile. The soldier in charge of it is thin, his cap pulled low over his eyes, and he hands out items without looking at the men receiving them. Your tunic is several sizes too large, the sleeves hanging past your wrists, and the hem nearly to your knees. The trousers are better, but one knee is patched with a different colour of cloth. The boots you're given are scuffed and cracked, the soles worn smooth, and you have to try on 3 mismatched pairs before finding one that is close enough in size to keep. The laces are frayed and tied in knots to keep them from unravelling entirely. From another stack you receive a thin belt, a worn cap with its lining half detached, and a blanket rolled tightly, with twine. There are no overcoats left in your size, though you overhear one of the other men muttering that it hardly matters. The fighting will decide your fate long before the cold does. The last item is a rifle, but it is not handed to you. Instead, you are directed to a small group of men standing off to one side. Their rifles are equally battered, each with a small cloth pouch tied to the stock. The soldier who leads you to them explains, almost apologetically, that there are not enough weapons for everyone. You will carry ammunition, he says, and when one of the riflemen falls, you will take his place. The words sink into you slowly, as though they must travel some distance before you can feel their weight. Around you, the noise of the staging ground continues. Shouted orders, boots on gravel, the thud of crates being set down. Somewhere nearby, a hammer is striking metal in a steady rhythm. A group of men in medical armbands hurry past carrying a stretcher between them, the form on it hidden beneath a blanket. The smell of smoke is stronger here, joined by the sharper scent of oil and the faint, underlying sweetness of something burnt long ago but still lingering in the air. Once outfitted, you're moved again, this time to an open lot where more conscripts wait. The ground here is uneven, scattered with shell casings and pieces of broken timber. A few men squat against a wall smoking, their faces turned away from the rest. Others sit on their gear, staring at nothing. There is no instruction, no orientation, only the occasional barked command to stand straighter or shift to make room for another group. You stand where you're told, your bag at your feet, and watch the light fade from the sky as the hours pass. The burning glow you saw from the train is still visible to the east, flickering against the low clouds. When food arrives, it is a single dented pot of thin soup carried by 2 soldiers. Men line up quickly, cups and mess tins in hand, and the pot is nearly empty before your turn comes. The liquid is warm, but tastes of little more than boiled water and cabbage, and there is not enough to fill you. Still, it takes the edge off the hunger that has been building since the train, and you drink it quickly before returning to your place. Someone passes down a small loaf of bread cut into uneven slices, and you take one without speaking. As night settles over the staging ground, the noise does not stop. The occasional rumble of artillery can be heard from the direction of the city, each distant thud followed by a faint tremor in the ground. Somewhere in the dark a truck backfires, and the sound is sharp enough to make several men flinch. You unroll your blanket and sit against a wall, drawing your knees up under the too large tunic. Sleep does not come easily. Every time your eyes close, some new noise breaks the stillness. The scrape of boots, the metallic clink of a rifle being set down, the low murmur of 2 men talking just out of earshot. In the small hours, a sergeant walks among the men, speaking in short, clipped sentences. He tells you and those near you to be ready before dawn. There will be a march to the river, he says, and from there you will receive further orders. The phrasing makes it sound as though this is routine, but his voice carries no assurance. He moves on before anyone can ask questions. Around you, men begin to gather their gear, retying straps and checking what little equipment they have been given. The rifles are passed between hands in quiet exchanges, some men turning them over as though measuring their weight for the first time. The march toward the river begins in darkness, the sky still holding that pre-dawn heaviness, where the light seems to hesitate before rising. The ground underfoot is uneven, pitted with shallow holes and scattered with splintered wood. You can hear the river long before you see it, a low, constant murmur beneath the distant roar of artillery. The column moves slowly, not out of choice, but because the path narrows and twists through gullies and stretches of churned earth. The fires in the distance are larger now, their glow casting a faint red haze over the low clouds. Each time a shell lands somewhere ahead, the air shivers, and the sound runs down your spine like a slow current. As the first hints of daylight seep into the sky, the river comes into view. It is darker than you expected, a broad, shifting expanse that seems to absorb the dim light rather than reflect it. Smoke drifts across its surface in ragged bands, blurring the far shore into a shape that could be land or just another cloud bank. The water moves with a sluggish, heavy motion, carrying debris that you only recognize in pieces. A plank with nails still embedded, a half-submerged crate, the rounded shape of something that might once have been a barrel. Every so often, the current catches on something darker, less defined, and carries it slowly out of sight. Near the bank, the noise changes. The steady rumble of the guns is still there, but now it is joined by the closer sounds of shouted orders, boots scraping over stone, the splash of water against hulls. A cluster of low, battered buildings hugs the shoreline, some missing roofs, others patched with tarpaulin or rough boards. Men move in and out of them, with the restless pace of people trying to work faster than time will allow. You are directed toward a stretch of churned mud where a group of soldiers stands waiting beside a ferry. Little more than a flat barge with a low railing, its surface slick with water and ash. The metal fittings on its sides are rusted, and one corner has been crudely reinforced with a plank nailed into place. The boatman is already there, a stocky man in a faded jacket, his cap pulled low over his brow. He says nothing, only gestures for you to step forward. The ferry rocks as each man boards, the shallow water slapping against its sides. You find a place near the centre, gripping your bag with both hands and keeping your feet apart for balance. The boards beneath you are worn smooth, and water seeps up through gaps between them, dampening your boots. The smell here is a mix of river mud and smoke that lingers no matter how the wind shifts. When the ferry is full, the boatman takes his position at the stern, shoving off with a heavy pole before turning to the rope and pulley system that will pull you across. The movement is slow at first, the hull dragging against the shallow bank, but then the river's current takes hold and the ferry sways as it moves into deeper water. You keep your eyes on the far shore, though it is hard to see clearly through the shifting smoke. Shapes loom and vanish, the jagged outline of buildings, the narrow stalk of a smokestack, the darker silhouettes of cranes frozen in place. Halfway across, a shell lands in the water somewhere upstream. The blast throws up a high column of spray and sends a shockwave through the current, making the ferry shudder underfoot. Men tighten their grips on their rifles and bags but say nothing. The boatman does not even glance toward the explosion. His hands keep the rope moving in the same steady rhythm. Another shell falls closer this time, the sound sharper, the spray falling over the deck in cold, stinging drops. You feel the dampness soak into your tunic and sleeves, but you do not wipe it away. The river carries other things besides debris. At first you think the dark shapes passing on the current are logs or bundles of brush, but as the ferry draws nearer, you see the angles of arms, the pale curves of faces just under the surface. Some drift on their backs, eyes open to the sky. Others float face down, their clothes billowing with each swell of the water. None of the men on the ferry speak about them, though you see a few turn their heads slightly, as if looking away might make the sight vanish. The bodies pass silently, carried by the slow, patient pull of the Volga. Overhead, the drone of engines cuts through the morning air. You glance up to see dark shapes moving against the pale sky. Aircraft, their wings catching brief flashes of light as they bank. The sound grows louder, and a moment later, thin columns of water rise from the river's surface, where their guns rake the shallows. The boatman ducks his head, but does not stop working the rope. The men crouch lower, gripping the ferry's railing, but there is nowhere to hide. The aircraft pass quickly, the noise fading behind you, leaving only the wet slap of water and the distant thunder of the guns. As the ferry draws nearer to the far shore, the smoke thickens, carrying with it the dry, gritty taste of ash. You can see more clearly now the shapes of the buildings ahead. Not intact structures, but the remnants of them. Their walls crumbling, their windows punched out, their roofs caved in. Here and there, a chimney stands alone. The house it once belonged to gone entirely. The bank itself is a mess of broken stone, twisted metal, and earth torn apart by shelling. A narrow strip of mud runs between the waterline and the first ridge of rubble, crowded with men moving in both directions. Some hunched under loads, others dragging stretchers, a few picking their way carefully over the debris, as if looking for something they have lost. The ferry grinds against the shore with a dull, wet scrape. The boatman secures it without a word, looping the rope over a bent metal post that looks as though it has survived more by accident than by strength. The men begin to disembark, stepping carefully onto the uneven ground. The mud here is slick and clings to your boots, pulling at them with each step. You can feel the grit working its way into the cracks in the leather, the cold dampness seeping through to your feet. The air is hotter here than it was on the opposite bank, though the sun is still low. The heat does not come from the sky, but from the fires smouldering among the ruins, sending waves of warmth through the drifting smoke. Each breath carries with it the sharp tang of burned wood, scorched brick, and something less distinct but heavier, the lingering scent of what happens when everything in a place is set alight. Somewhere behind the nearest ridge of rubble, a building collapses with a deep, hollow crash, sending up a plume of dust that blends into the rest of the haze. You step clear of the ferry and move toward the base of the rubble slope, the sound of the river fading behind you. The grit in the air catches in your throat, and you swallow against it, feeling it scratch as it goes down. Ahead, the path narrows between heaps of stone and shattered beams, the way forward marked only by the tracks of boots in the dust. Somewhere beyond this tangle of debris, the city waits, and the heat of its fires is already pressing against your skin. You climb the low rise of rubble from the riverbank, boots slipping on loose stone and ash. The slope is uneven, the fragments beneath your feet shifting with every step, forcing you to brace yourself against the charred timbers that jut out at odd angles. At the top, the ground levels into what was once a street, though it is hard to recognise it as such. The cobblestones are broken, the tram rails warped and bent like discarded wire. A shattered tram lies on its side across the far end of the intersection, its metal skin peeled open in places as if torn by enormous hands. The glass from its windows has been ground into the dust, and the inside is blackened from fire. The buildings on either side are in no better shape. One has had its entire facade ripped away, leaving the rooms inside exposed to the open air, wallpaper scorched and curling, furniture splintered, a bed frame leaning at an angle against what used to be an interior wall. Across the street, an apartment block has collapsed inward on itself. Beyond that, you glimpse the skeletal outline of a factory, its high windows shattered, the roof caved in over machinery that will never run again. Men move through the wreckage with the cautious urgency of people who know they are being watched. Some carry stretchers, their burdens shrouded under tarpaulin. Others drag crates or push handcarts laden with supplies. Every few seconds, the distant crack of a rifle cuts through the low rumble of the city. Each shot is followed by a moment of stillness, as if the sound has pressed everyone briefly into the ground, and then movement resumes. Somewhere behind you, closer to the river, an explosion sends up a thin column of dust that drifts slowly across the rooftops. You are waved forward by a soldier whose uniform is streaked with soot and torn at the elbow. He points you toward a group gathered beside a half-collapsed wall that might once have been part of a warehouse. An officer stands there, his voice sharp against the dull roar of the city. He does not introduce himself or explain your purpose, only barks an order for you to take cover and dig in. He gestures to the ground in front of the wall, where a shallow depression has already been started. The wall leans at an angle, its bricks cracked and flaking, but it offers the only cover in sight. A man beside you hands over a small cloth pouch with a few cartridges inside. They are dull with handling, and you can feel the grit on their casings as you slip them into your pocket. The weight is negligible, but the meaning is not. There is no rifle for you yet, only the expectation that you will be ready when one becomes available. Food is not offered, nor water, and you realise, with a dry mouth, that no one has mentioned either since you left the staging ground. You drop to your knees in the dust and begin working at the hard ground, with your hands and a broken piece of metal scavenged from the rubble. The soil is dry and mixed with bits of brick and glass that scrape your skin when you dig too deep. Around you, the other men work in silence, their faces set in the blank expressions of people who have learned that conversation is a luxury. Every so often, the officer passes by, glancing down at your progress without comment. Not far away, two soldiers are dragging bodies toward a corner where the street dips into shadow. The forms are limp, their limbs hanging loose, faces obscured by dust and the angle of their heads. The soldiers do not stop to rest, even when one of the bodies catches on a jagged piece of metal and they have to lift it over. By the time they return for another, a small heap has begun to form, covered by whatever cloth or tarpaulin is at hand. The sight is not shocking in the way you might have expected. It is simply another fact of this place, as present as the rubble under your knees or the grit in your teeth. The sun climbs higher, though it is difficult to tell through the smoke that drifts continually across the sky. The light that filters through is a muted orange, flattening the shapes of the ruins and turning the air thick with heat. Sweat runs down your back beneath the oversized tunic. and the fabric clings to your skin. Your hands are scraped and dirty, the nails cracked from prying at the ground. When you pause to stretch your shoulders, the officer's voice snaps out again, and you bend back to the work without a word. As the afternoon wears on, the noise of the city ebbs and surges. Sometimes it is a steady background, distant shelling, the occasional burst of machine gun fire, and other times it comes in sudden waves, the sharp reports of rifles echoing down the empty streets, followed by shouts that are too far away to understand. Once a building collapses somewhere nearby, the sound like a long exhale of stone and timber before it crashes into silence. A thin layer of dust settles over everything, coating your hands, your face, the cartridges in your pocket. When the digging is finally called to a halt, the shallow trench offers little more than the illusion of safety. You sit back on your heels, muscles aching, and glance toward the officer for further orders. He is speaking to another man, gesturing toward the eastern edge of the street, where the buildings break into open ground. You catch only fragments of the exchange, but the tone is clipped and impatient. The man he is speaking to nods once and moves off at a quick pace, disappearing between two gutted buildings. You stay where you are, knees in the dust, until the officer waves a hand in dismissal. There is nowhere to go. The wall you have been working beside is as much home as you will have here. You ease yourself down into the shallow trench, pulling your bag close and wrapping the blanket loosely around your shoulders. The fabric smells faintly of smoke and the river, and it does little to keep out the cooling air. Your stomach growls, but you ignore it, focusing instead on the sounds that mark the approach of night. The light fades quickly, the sky shifting from its dull orange to a deeper red before sinking into grey. The smoke blurs the line between day and night, so that you're never entirely sure when one ends and the other begins. In the distance, the sniping continues, single measured shots that seem to come from nowhere and strike without warning. Each one is followed by a pause, as if the city itself is holding its breath, and then by the faint sound of movement as men shift positions or retreat into cover. Somewhere farther off, muffled explosions bloom and fade, the sound softened by distance, but still carrying a physical weight in your chest. Occasionally, the vibrations reach the ground beneath you, making the dust in the trench tremble. The officer's voice is gone now, replaced by the quieter exchanges of the men nearby. Low murmurs, the shuffle of boots, the faint metallic click of someone checking a weapon in the dark. You lie down in the trench, the dust rough against your cheek. The air is cooler now, though the smell of ash and smoke is as strong as ever. Above you, the ruined wall leans at its unnatural angle, a silhouette against the faint light of the smoke-hazed sky. You pull the blanket tighter, shifting your bag to serve as a pillow, and close your eyes. Sleep is slow to come, each sound in the night pulling you back to the surface, but you remain still. There is nowhere else to go, and nothing to do but wait for whatever comes with the next light. You're not awake when the first shell lands, but you're no longer asleep either. It is the kind of half-consciousness that comes after a night of broken rest, where every sound is a potential threat and every silence feels temporary. The mortar round lands somewhere nearby with a hollow concussive thud, shaking the dust from the leaning wall above you. For a second you think it is a dream, but then the next one falls closer, and the air tears open with the sound. The ground under your ribs shudders, and your eyes snap fully open into the dim pre-dawn light. Shouts ripple down the line, voices harsh and urgent in the still cool air. Men scramble up from where they've been lying, clutching rifles, ducking instinctively as another shell explodes in the street beyond. You pull yourself upright, the blanket slipping from your shoulders, and glance toward the officer. He is already moving along the shallow trench, pointing toward the smoke rising from the far end of the block. His words are half lost under the whine of another incoming round, but you hear enough to know that you're going forward. The first step out of the trench is into air that feels immediately different. Hotter, heavier, carrying the sharp tang of explosives. Smoke drifts thickly between the ruins, tinted orange by the weak lights of the still-hidden sun. The mortar impacts come in irregular bursts, sometimes a single explosion, sometimes 2 or 3 in quick succession. Each one lifts dust and debris into the air, the fine particles stinging your eyes and coating your teeth. You keep your head down, your shoulders hunched, following the shadow of the man in front of you as the group moves toward the front of the street. You pass 2 men on the ground near the collapsed tram. One is motionless, his head turned at an unnatural angle, his helmet a few feet away. The other is groaning, hands pressed to his side, where the tunic is dark and wet. A soldier kneels beside him, shouting for a stretcher that does not come. You keep moving, because the line is moving. Your boots catching on loose bricks and pieces of twisted metal. The smoke thickens as you reach the next intersection, turning the shapes of the ruins into vague, looming shadows. Somewhere ahead, rifle fire cracks in short, sharp bursts, followed by the flatter, deeper sound of a machine gun. A voice shouts something from the haze, and your officer shouts back, pointing toward a low wall, barely standing at the corner of a building. You and the others make for it, crouching low as a mortar shell lands close enough to throw fragments against the bricks with a sound like hail. One piece catches the edge of the wall just above your head, sending a sharp chip of stone down the back of your neck. When you reach the wall, you see why you have been sent. The men who held it before you are either gone or lying where they fell. One is slumped against the base of the wall, his rifle still in his hands, his eyes fixed on nothing. Another lies half on his side in the dust, a boot missing, the leg beneath it bent awkwardly. There is no time to look longer. The officer gestures sharply to take their places. Someone presses a rifle into your hands, the wood worn smooth, the metal warm from the last man's grip, and your pouch of cartridges suddenly feels like something that matters. You crouch low, the wall pressing into your back, and fumble with the ammunition. Your hands do not want to work properly. They shake in small, uncontrollable movements that make each cartridge heavier than it should be. Around you, the others are already firing, the reports loud and flat in the confined space. You cannot see what they are aiming at. The smoke and dust turn the street ahead into a shifting blur, but you raise the rifle and fire in the same direction, the recoil sharp against your shoulder. The air is filled with the sounds of impact, bullets striking brick, splinters flying from beams, fragments of plaster falling from the few walls still standing. Somewhere above, you hear the faint, metallic whine of a ricochet, then the thud as it strikes something farther off. Another mortar round lands close enough that you feel the blast in your chest, a heavy, sudden pressure that leaves your ears ringing. The wall holds, though dust drifts down in a steady curtain from its upper edge. You load and fire again, and again, the rhythm becoming mechanical. The target is never clear, only the flashes in the haze and the movement you think you see between bursts of smoke. Once the wind shifts just enough to show the dark outline of a figure moving behind a pile of rubble, and you fire toward it without thinking. Whether you hit anything, you do not know. The man beside you grunts as he works his bolt, muttering something under his breath that is lost under the noise. The attack does not come in a rush, but in a slow, grinding push. The firing ahead seems to edge closer, then stalls, then surges again. Each time it feels nearer, you duck lower behind the wall, your fingers gripping the rifle tighter. The officer moves along the line, shouting for men to hold, to keep their heads down. His voice sounds more strained now, though he tries to keep it level. At one point, a shell lands in the street not far from the wall, sending a wave of heat and grit over you. You flinch, turning your head, and feel something sharp glance off your upper arm, not deep enough to stop you, but enough to sting. When you look down, the sleeve of your tunic has a small tear, the fabric blackened at the edge. You brush at it with your free hand and keep firing. Time stretches strangely in the smoke. You cannot tell how long you have been crouched here, how many times you have loaded and fired, or how many cartridges remain in your pouch. The street ahead shifts in and out of focus as the wind moves the haze, revealing half-collapsed doorways, piles of bricks, the jagged outline of a roof beam, leaning at an impossible angle. The sound of gunfire is constant, though sometimes it feels louder in your own ears, as if your heartbeat has begun to keep time with it. Gradually, the firing begins to thin out. There are longer pauses between shots, the mortar rounds less frequent. The voices around you are quieter now, men speaking in low tones, or not at all. You risk a glance over the edge of the wall, but the street looks much the same as it did an hour ago, broken, empty, the haze shifting aimlessly. Whatever force was pressing forward seems to have drawn back, or been stopped, though it is impossible to say which. When the officer calls for the line to hold, it is less an order than an acknowledgement that you're not moving forward. You sit back against the wall, the rifle resting across your knees, your breath coming in slow, shallow pulls. The man beside you is gone. In his place is someone you do not recognize, his face streaked with soot and blood, his eyes fixed on the street. Farther down the line, you count fewer figures than there were when you first crouched here. The ground under you is littered with fragments, bits of stone, twisted metal, empty cartridges. The dust clings to your hands and face, mixing with the sweat until it forms a thin, gritty layer that you can feel every time you blink. You close your eyes for a moment, leaning your head back against the wall, and let the sound of the quieter street settle into your bones. The ground you hold is the same as when you arrived, but there are now fewer men beside you. The street holds its silence for the rest of the morning, as if the fighting has moved elsewhere, leaving behind only the debris and the men still capable of standing guard over it. You remain behind the wall, the rifle balanced loosely in your hands, and let the steady thump of your heart beat slow again. No one speaks much. The quiet is not peace, only the space between storms, and everyone knows it. Even the officer, usually sharp and clipped in his instructions, moves more slowly now, checking the line without the same urgency as before, his eyes scanning the empty haze ahead, as though the city itself might be planning its next move. The days that follow settle into a rhythm you could never have imagined before you arrived, one not marked by the clock, but by the pattern of noise and its absence. The barrages come without warning, a string of mortar shells tearing through the morning air, or a sudden burst of rifle fire from somewhere unseen. When they pass, the lull is immediate and jarring, as if someone has lifted a heavy weight from the air, leaving behind a fragile stillness. You learn quickly to use those moments. Food arrives rarely, and when it does, it is in quantities so small that you are hungrier after eating than you were before. A strip of bread, a spoonful of gruel, sometimes nothing at all. For a full day, you begin to search the surrounding ruins during the quiet hours, picking through the remains of apartments and shops for anything edible. Once you find a few shriveled potatoes in the corner of a collapsed kitchen. Another time, a tin of something so rusted that you spend nearly an hour prying it open with your knife, only to discover a paste of meat and bone that tastes faintly of metal. You eat it anyway. Hunger dulls the lines of taste until all food becomes the same. Something to swallow, to fill the empty space, nothing more. Water is even harder to come by. The wells and pumps are either destroyed or too exposed to reach without risking being seen. So you take to collecting snow in dented pots and melting it over the small fires. You can manage to light in sheltered corners. The fires are dangerous. Too much smoke and someone might see, so they are built low, the flames barely more than a flicker. The melted snow tastes of ash and dust, but it is cold against your tongue and enough to keep you moving for another day. The wounded are patched up with whatever is at hand. Torn curtains become strips of bandage. The stuffing from a pillow serves as padding for a splint. You remember hearing once that there is a proper way to bind a wound, a technique to it. But here, there is only the immediate need to stop the bleeding before the man fades out entirely. Those who cannot walk on their own are carried back toward the riverbank, though you do not know what happens to them after that. You suspect that for many, the journey itself is the end. The buildings around you grow more familiar with each passing day, not because they are whole or safe, but because their ruin becomes your landscape. You can tell the time of day by the way the light falls through the jagged edges of a roof, or by the angle of shadow cast by a leaning chimney. In some places, entire floors are missing, leaving open holes above and below where stairwells used to be. You avoid those spots, not out of fear of falling, but because you know that a single misstep there could bring down what little remains of the structure. There are moments when you find yourself staring upward through those gaps, past the splintered beams and the hanging scraps of wallpaper, to the thin strip of sky above. It is not the same sky you remember from home. Here it is always veiled with smoke, the blue muted, the clouds smeared into grey streaks. Yet you find yourself watching it anyway, if only because it's the only thing in this place that still looks like it might belong to another world. Sometimes you see the faint shapes of birds wheeling far above the reach of the guns, and you wonder what they see when they look down. The nights are worse in their own way. The cold settles deeper after sunset, creeping into your bones, no matter how tightly you wrap the blanket around yourself. Sleep comes in snatches, broken by the echo of distant gunfire or the sudden crash of a building collapsing somewhere in the dark. You begin to dream less, or at least remember less, as if your mind has decided that rest is no place for imagining anything beyond the next day. You hear rumours always in fragments. Someone claims that reinforcements are on the way. Someone else insists that the Germans are massing for another push. You stop trying to sort truth from invention. The only reliable news is what your own eyes and ears tell you, and even that feels suspect at times. In a city like this, reality is just another thing that can be buried under rubble. The officer spends more time away from your position now, moving between the small groups scattered along the line. When he returns, his face is harder to read, though his orders are still short and without explanation. You learn not to ask questions, not because you fear the answer, but because there is nothing useful in hearing it. Once, during a long lull, you come across a small photograph, half buried in the dust near a doorway. It shows a family, a man in a worker's jacket, a woman in a plain dress, a child balanced on her knee. The edges are charred, and the child's face is missing entirely where the paper has burned away. You turn it over in your hands, then slip it into your pocket without knowing why. Later, you will find it still there, crumpled but intact, after you have forgotten that you ever picked it up. The smell of the city shifts with the wind. Some days it is mostly smoke and dust. Other days, there is something heavier, a rot that clings to the back of your throat, no matter how you breathe. You learn to keep a scrap of cloth tied loosely around your face when it grows too strong, though it does little to keep the taste from settling on your tongue. More than once you find yourself thinking about the silence that follows a bombardment. It is never complete. There is always the groan of settling rubble, the hiss of something still burning, but it has a quality that feels almost like relief. It is in those moments, crouched in the shallow trench or leaning against a wall with the rifle across your lap, that you realise how little of yourself you're holding on to. The days are measured in the space between noises, the hours in the distance, between one shockwave and the next. The evenings are darker now, the kind of dusk that comes on faster than you expect, with a thin coolness that makes you notice your breath if you linger outside too long. Winter is rapidly approaching. On the 5th evening after the last major attack, the officer returns with a different kind of order. He stands in the fading light, his shadow stretching long across the broken street, and tells you to be ready to move after nightfall. No explanation, no mention of where you're going or why, only that you will be taking a different position before dawn. His tone makes it clear there will be no discussion. The rest of the daylight hours pass in a slow coil of waiting. You sit in the dust, your gear already packed, and watch the shadows deepen in the gaps between the buildings. The men around you are quiet, some sharpening bayonets, others simply staring at the ground. When the darkness finally comes, it seems thicker than usual, swallowing the shapes of the city until the streets no longer resemble streets at all. Somewhere in that blackness you will have to find your way forward. The march begins in near total darkness, the city reduced to shifting shapes and muted sounds. You move in a single file through streets that are no longer streets, just uneven paths carved between piles of debris. The cold bites at your hands and face, and every step feels heavier than the one before. Somewhere to your left, a building groans under its own weight and collapses, the sound a deep, muffled roar that swallows the night for a moment. No one pauses, the line keeps moving, guided by the occasional hand signal from the officer at the front. As you advance, the open spaces grow narrower. The piles of rubble on either side press closer until you're funneled between walls that lean inward, their upper floors long gone. You step over broken door frames, duck under splintered beams, and pass through gaps where a wall has been blasted apart, leaving jagged edges like torn paper. The smell of brick dust is stronger here, mixed with the faint metallic tang of old blood and the acrid scent of burned wood. It coats the inside of your nose and mouth, so that each breath tastes the same. The first shock comes from somewhere ahead, sharp and sudden, followed by the echo of boots scuffing against stone. The officer hisses for the column to break into smaller groups, and you find yourself pressed against a wall, the cold seeping through your tunic. Someone ahead pulls the pin from a grenade, the metallic snap barely audible over the pounding in your ears, and lobs it through the darkened doorway of a partially collapsed building. The explosion inside is sharp, compact, followed by a burst of dust from the doorway, and a muffled cry that cuts off almost immediately. You are waved forward, and the interior swallows you. The air inside is thicker, hotter, the dust still hanging in clouds from the blast. Shadows leap across the walls in the light from a single flickering lamp left burning on a shelf. You step over the remains of furniture smashed into splinters, the floor beneath it littered with debris and what's left of the men who had been inside. You do not stop to look. The others are already moving toward the next doorway, weapons ready. The fighting narrows to a brutal rhythm. Clear a room, move to the next, repeat. Grenades into basements where movement is heard, rifles raised at every corner, quick bursts of fire through doorways, without waiting to see who or what might be on the other side. Each step forward is over glass, brick shards, or the bodies of those who are unlucky enough to be caught in the wrong place when the line advanced. The city outside is a blur now. All that matters is the next doorway, the next stairwell, the next wall you must get past. Somewhere above, boots pound across what remains of a floor, followed by a burst of gunfire that splinters the doorframe beside you. You duck instinctively, feeling the sting of brick dust against your cheek. The man in front of you swings his rifle up and fires through the hole in the wall, the muzzle flash briefly lighting the narrow corridor in harsh white. There is no cry from the other side, only the sound of something heavy falling. Your sense of direction begins to dissolve. Every building seems connected to the next by makeshift gaps, blasted out walls, stairwells that end abruptly in open space, doorways leading into rooms where the opposite wall is gone entirely. The streets you once knew, even from maps or rumour, no longer exist. Now it is just one continuous maze of broken rooms and shifting cover, where forward is whichever way you're told to move in the moment. The smell of blood grows sharper as the night wears on. It mingles with the scent of spent powder and the constant haze of pulverised brick that turns every surface, walls, floors, even the men beside you, into the same dull red-brown. Your throat burns from breathing it in, and your eyes water, though you keep them open against the sting. There is no time to wipe your face, no pause long enough to take a proper breath without the risk of falling behind. In one room, you find a man slumped against the far wall, his hand still wrapped around the grip of his pistol. His eyes are glassy, his head tipped back at an unnatural angle, and a dark stain spreads across his chest. You step past him, the soles of your boots sticking for a moment to the floor, where the blood has begun to dry. In another, a narrow staircase descends into darkness, and a grenade is sent down before anyone follows. The blast shakes dust from the ceiling, and the air rushes past your face with a hot, dry push. Occasionally, you catch sight of the outside through a hole in a wall or a window without glass. The glow of fires still burning, the jagged silhouettes of factories, the occasional flash of artillery from somewhere far off. These glimpses are brief and disorienting, a reminder that the rest of the city still exists in some form, even if you will never see it whole again. You lose track of time. The only measure is the gradual ache that builds in your legs and arms. The way your grip on the rifle begins to falter when you have to raise it too quickly. Your ears ring from the constant blasts, and every sharp sound sends a twitch through your muscles. The voices of your comrades are muffled and close, their words short and functional, stripped of anything not necessary to keep moving. At one point, you're caught in the open of a wide hallway when fire erupts from a doorway at the far end. The bullets chip stone from the walls on either side, and you drop to the ground, the impact jarring your shoulder. Someone beside you fumbles for a grenade and tosses it before throwing himself flat. The blast that follows leaves your ears buzzing so loudly that you barely hear the call to move forward again. You push yourself up, boots sliding on the debris, and press on. The night bleeds into something like dawn, though the light is too faint and fractured to feel like morning. It comes in pale streaks through gaps in the walls, in broken windows, in the jagged holes left by shells. You find yourself in what was once a large room, perhaps an office or a store. The counters smashed, the floors strewn with papers so coated in dust they are unreadable. Your body moves more slowly now, every step an effort. The others have paused, some leaning against walls, others crouched to catch their breath. You follow their example, sliding down until you're sitting with your back against a section of wall still solid enough to hold you. The plaster is cold through your tunic, but it feels steady, immovable in a way nothing else has tonight. Above you, through a shell hole in what remains of the ceiling, the first thin light of day filters in. It catches on the drifting dust in the air, turning it briefly golden before it fades into the grey. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the rifle across your lap and the ache in every joint. For now, at least, you're still here, pressed against the wall, while the city around you shifts and groans in the light of another day. The pale daylight through the shell hole does not last long. The sky darkens again, but this time it is not smoke alone that dims it. The first snow begins as a fine scattering of flakes, so light that they vanish the moment they touch the warm skin of your face. For a while, it feels almost out of place here, drifting lazily through the open wounds of the buildings, falling over the blackened beams and crumbling brick. But as the hours pass, the flakes grow heavier, clinging to stone, timber, and metal. They settle on the heaps of rubble, and over the shapes lying motionless between them, softening their edges without hiding what they are. By nightfall, the snow has claimed the streets in patches, filling the footprints of those who still move through them, and burying the signs of those who do not. It coats the tarpaulin draped over bodies, freezes to the straps of abandoned gear, and gathers in the hollows of collapsed roofs. There is no clean white in it. The snow takes on the colours of the city, ash grey where the wind has blown it through soot, streaked with rust where it mixes with the damp seeping from broken pipes, tinged brown where it has fallen on dried blood. The cold settles in quickly, turning the air sharp enough to sting your lungs when you breathe too deeply. The oversized tunic you were given now stiffens at the seams when the damp in the fabric freezes. Your fingers grow slow and clumsy, even inside the thin gloves you have scavenged from the belongings of a man who no longer needs them. At night, the blanket feels less like warmth and more like an extra layer of cold you can wrap around yourself, a barrier against the wind, but not against the ache in your bones. The rifles suffer too. On the first morning after the snow begins to stay on the ground, you watch a man beside you struggle to work the bolts of his weapon. The metal resists him, groaning against the frost that has crept into every moving part. You take to checking your own rifle constantly, cycling the bolt and rubbing the barrel with a rag to keep the ice from locking it solid. The effort feels almost superstitious, but you have seen enough to know what happens when a weapon fails in the instant it is needed. Breath hangs in the air now, each exhale a pale ghost that lingers before being torn apart by the wind. In the mornings, the ground crunches under your boots, where yesterday it was soft with dust. The sound carries farther in the stillness, and you find yourself moving more slowly, more carefully, aware of how far each step's echo might travel. The enemy is no less present in this cold. If anything, they seem closer, their movements easier to hear in the crisp air. Hunger deepens as the cold sharpens. The rations, already small, seem even less substantial, when your body burns every scrap of energy just to stay warm. Bread freezes solid in your pocket, so you break it into pieces with the butt of your rifle and chew each one slowly until it softens enough to swallow. If you're lucky enough to find a scrap of meat or a few spoonfuls of thin soup, you eat quickly before it cools into an unappetizing skin of fat and ice. The lice do not mind the weather. If anything, they thrive in it, hiding in the seams of your clothing where the warmth of your body still reaches. You scratch absently at the back of your neck, at your waist, at your ankles, and the motion becomes so constant that you sometimes do not notice you're doing it. The men joke about it on rare occasions, calling it their company in the trenches, but the humour is worn thin and short-lived. At night, you can feel the crawling under the layers you cannot afford to shed. The city's ruins have changed again under the snow. The outlines are softer, the hard edges muted, but this only makes it harder to judge distances. What looked like a shallow drift might conceal a deep hole. What seemed to be solid ground can collapse into a hidden cellar under the weight of a single step. You learn to probe ahead with the rifle's barrel before putting your full weight down, an awkward but necessary habit. In the rare moments when the guns are quiet, the silence in the snow-covered city is complete, in a way you have not experienced before. Sound is swallowed before it travels far, and the air feels heavier, the cold pressing in from all sides. You sometimes catch yourself staring at the way the snow gathers on the jagged edges of a broken wall or in the curve of a twisted girder, as if the shapes might tell you something about what comes next. They never do. The cold also changes the dead. In the warmer days, they shifted slowly toward decay, colours fading, shapes settling into the ground. Now they remain exactly as they fell, the snow freezing their clothes into rigid folds, their limbs locked at whatever angle they were in when the last breath left them. You pass the same faces day after day, unchanged except for the layer of frost that builds upon them. They seem less like people and more like part of the city itself, features in the landscape that the snow only emphasizes. Your body feels heavier each day, as though the cold has seeped into the marrow of your bones. Simple tasks, adjusting a strap, rewrapping a scarf, take twice as long, your fingers refusing to obey until you force them through the motions. You begin to dread the nights, not just for the cold, but for the stillness that comes with them, the way the air seems to grow sharper in the dark. Sometimes, when the wind shifts, You can hear the creak of ice forming along the edges of the Volga. On the third day of the snow, the officer's voice cuts across the muffled quiet. His words are sharp in the frozen air, ordering you and the others to hold your position. There is talk of an enemy counterattack, not shouted or spread widely, but murmured from man to man, the kind of news that carries weight without needing volume. You check your rifle again, working the bolt until it moves without resistance, and pat the pocket where the cartridges knock faintly against one another. The position you are to hold is nothing more than a section of half-collapsed wall and the ground in front of it. The snow there has been churned into a mixture of ice and mud by boots, frozen solid in uneven ridges that make it difficult to kneel without discomfort. You take your place along the line, shoulders hunched against the wind, and look out across the narrow stretch of open ground that separates you from the nearest cover. It is empty now, the snow unmarked, but you know that will not last. As you crouch there, breath ghosting into the air, it is clear that the cold will take as many men as the bullets will. You can feel it already in your fingers, in the slow drag of your heartbeat, in the way the frost clings to your lashes. Whatever comes next, the snow will be here to watch it happen. The order to hold never ends. Days pass with the same stretch of frozen ground before you, the same churned snow under your knees, the same half-collapsed wall at your back. The enemy does not charge in force, but they do not vanish either. You hear them sometimes, muffled through the snow and wind. The scrape of boots, the metallic clink of a weapon being shifted, the sharp report of a rifle shot meant less to kill than to remind you they are still watching. It is during one of those long brittle afternoons that the whisper begins. It comes from a man further down the line, passed on with the kind of quiet urgency that needs no shouting. The city is surrounded, the story goes. The enemy has closed the ring. There will be no retreat now, no fallback point, no movement except forward or into the ground. You are not sure where the whisper started, or whether the man who told you actually heard it from anyone who knows. It hardly matters. True or not, it feels right. The sound of artillery in the distance is different now, less sporadic, more like the steady hammering of a door being nailed shut. The effect on the men is subtle at first. They still check their weapons, still shift positions to keep warm, still peer over the wall when they think it is safe. But the glances exchanged are longer now. The silence is heavier. You see them counting cartridges in their hands, not as a way to prepare for a fight, but as if weighing how many more times they will be able to fire before there is nothing left to load. The officer confirms it later without ceremony. Ammunition will be rationed to single rounds at a time. A runner will bring more only if it is absolutely necessary. Food is worse. Whatever supply lines fed the city before are gone now, severed like cut veins. The bread you are given is no longer baked fresh anywhere nearby. It arrives in dry, hard slabs that you break against your knee and suck on until they soften. Sometimes the ration is only a crust, small enough to disappear in 2 bites if you're not careful. Men hide their pieces in their pockets, nibbling at them slowly through the day. There is talk of boiling leather for broth, though whether anyone has done it yet you do not know. The dead cannot be carried back to the rear anymore. It is too far, too exposed, and there are too many of them. The officer orders shallow pits dug within sight of your position, close enough that you can still see the mounded earth from where you crouch with your rifle. The ground is frozen solid just beneath the surface, and it takes hours of hacking with shovels, picks, and whatever else can be found to make even a narrow trench deep enough to cover a man. More than once you pass one of those pits and see a boot or sleeve emerging where the soil has shifted. When the wind changes, the smell reaches you. It is not strong in the way it would have been in warmer weather, but it carries a sweetness that does not belong in the cold. You try to breathe through your mouth when it drifts your way, though that only adds the taste of it to the air you draw in. The snow does its best to hide the mounds, but each new fall is stained quickly by the dark seep of what lies beneath. The work of staying alive becomes more mechanical. You melt snow when you can, eat when something is handed to you, keep the rifle clean enough to fire. Your fingers are raw from the cold and from the endless small tasks of survival. At night, you wedge yourself into whatever shelter you can find, wrapping the blanket tight and tucking your knees up to your chest, trying to keep the wind from finding its way in. Sleep is shallow and restless, more a series of short absences than anything deep enough to escape into. Every now and then, a shell will fall close enough to send a spray of snow and dirt over your position. In the lulls that follow, you sometimes hear men talking quietly about home, not as it is now, but as it was before the war. The sound of their voices in those moments is different from when they speak about food or orders. It is softer, almost as though they are speaking to themselves. You rarely join in. When you think of home, it is not the fields or the streets that come to you first, but the weight of the air, the smell of the ground after rain, the sound of the wind against the roof at night. You begin to notice how often your thoughts drift there when your eyes close. Whether you're huddled against the wall, waiting for the next ration, or leaning on the rifle while scanning the open ground, the image of home creeps in unbidden. Sometimes it comes in fragments, a fence post leaning in the sun, the light through a window at dawn, the sound of someone calling from a distance. Other times, it feels complete, so vivid that for a few moments you are certain that if you opened your eyes, you would find yourself there. But every time you do open them, the same truth waits. The snow is still there, churned and stained. The wall is still cracked and leaning. The men are still shifting from foot to foot, their breaths ghosting in the cold. The city is still closed tight around you, the ring drawn, the exits gone. You have not left, you will not leave. Word comes down the line one night. There will be a push at dawn. No speeches, no promises, only the blunt fact that you will advance. You lie in the darkness, listening to the snow hissing against the rubble, knowing the morning will be grey and brittle and waiting for you. The morning comes grey and brittle, the kind of cold that feels as if the air itself might shatter if struck. The sky's low, heavy with clouds that refuse to snow, as though they're waiting to see what will happen before deciding whether to release anything. The frozen ground creaks faintly beneath the shifting of boots, and every breath you draw turns to frost in the scarf wrapped across your face. There is no wind, no birds, no sound at all until the officer's voice cuts through the stillness with the order to move. You step out from behind the half-collapsed wall that has been your shelter for longer than you care to measure. The snow is waist-deep in places, crusted over with ice that breaks in sharp edges when you push through. Each step takes more effort than it should. Your thighs burning under the weight of the gear and the cold drag of wet fabric clinging to your legs. The others fan out to either side, moving as one slow, uneven line across the open ground. Ahead, the city is a series of jagged silhouettes, broken roofs, leaning chimneys, walls punched through with holes large enough to walk a cart through. The snow clings to every surface, softening the edges of destruction without disguising it. In some places, the drifts have buried the lower floors of buildings entirely, leaving only the upper windows visible above the white. You force your way forward, the sound of your breathing loud in your own ears, each exhale fogging the air in front of you. The bodies appear almost immediately. Some are half hidden beneath the snow, only a sleeve or a boot protruding, the fabric frozen stiff and pale with frost. Others lie fully exposed, their limbs twisted into positions no living man could hold, their faces locked in expressions the ice has preserved perfectly. You step over them when you can, skirt around them when the snow allows, but there are too many to avoid entirely. Once your boot catches on something beneath the surface, and you know from the solid, unnatural give that it is not a piece of rubble. You do not look down. The first shell lands somewhere to your right, throwing up a column of snow that hangs briefly in the air before falling back in a soft, deadly curtain. Shouts ripple along the line, but no one stops. The officer urges you forward with a sharp gesture. Another blast comes closer this time, scattering white in every direction and revealing a flash of red that fades quickly as it soaks into the ground. You wipe your sleeve across your face without realizing you're doing it, smearing ice and grit into your skin. The walls you pass are not solid in any real sense. They lean precariously, their bricks loosened by months of bombardment, their mortar crumbling at the edges. In some, you can see the remains of wallpaper beneath the frost, patterns of faded flowers or stripes that once decorated someone's home. It is impossible to imagine those rooms warm, intact, alive with voices. They exist now only as frozen shells, sheltering nothing but the cold. The enemy is still ahead, somewhere within the maze of ruins. You can feel them in the tension that runs through the line, in the way the men glance at every window and shadow. The first burst of gunfire comes from a second-story opening, the sound snapping through the stillness like a whip. Snow kicks up at your feet, and you drop instinctively, your knees striking hard ice. The man to your left returns fire, his rifle crack echoing between the walls. You scramble forward, keeping low, the rifle cold and solid in your grip. The advance becomes a stop-and-start crawl. You move forward in short bursts, then drop to one knee behind whatever cover the ruins offer. A section of wall, the curve of a half-buried doorway, the wreckage of a tram half swallowed by snow. The shells fall intermittently now, each explosion a sudden violent reminder of how exposed you are. One bursts close enough to shower you in chunks of ice and brick, the impact ringing in your ears long after the sound has gone. Somewhere ahead, a building collapses in slow motion, its roof sagging before giving way entirely, sending a wave of snow and dust into the street. You watch it fall without stopping, stepping over another body, this one propped against a doorway, as though resting. The snow has frozen his coat into a rigid shape, and his eyes are glazed with a thin film of ice. You do not linger. The officer signals for the line to press forward, his arm cutting sharply through the air. You obey because that is all there is to do. Your boots crunch over debris hidden beneath the snow. Splintered wood, shards of glass, metal twisted into unrecognizable forms. Your legs are heavy now, the muscles straining with each step. You feel the cold biting deeper through the damp fabric at your knees and ankles, but you keep moving. The street ahead narrows between two leaning buildings, their upper floors almost touching. Snow fills the gap beneath, packed hard by wind and time. As you enter the choke point, the air is ripped apart by the sound of another shell, this one close enough to make the ground shift under your feet. The blast is followed by a storm of fragments, striking the walls on either side, peppering the snow with small dark holes. You crouch low, head down, and push forward through the narrow pass. On the far side, the open ground is worse. The snow is deeper here, and the cover is scarce. Only the occasional section of wall jutting from the drifts, or the blackened remains of a vehicle half buried in ice. You make for the nearest of these, the cold air tearing at your lungs, and drop behind it as another shell explodes somewhere behind you. The mist of snow and blood that rises from the impact hangs briefly before being carried away by the faintest stir of wind. The push forward continues, but it feels slower now, as if the weight of the city itself is dragging at your legs. You hear the officer shouting something, but the words are lost under the crash of gunfire and the muffled thump of distant mortars. The men around you fire at shapes glimpsed through the haze, their breath coming in ragged bursts. You fire too, though you do not see where your bullets land. The cold in your legs is different now, sharper, more insistent. You push through it, stepping over a low wall and into another stretch of open ground. The snow here is churned and stained, the ice beneath slick under your boots. You take 3 more steps before the world, behind your eyes, turns white with the force of the blast. There is no warning, only the sudden roar and the violent shove of air and earth, the ground vanishes under you, and you are thrown sideways into the snow. For a moment, you do not hear anything. Not the gunfire, not the shouts, not even your own breath. The cold presses against your face, and the taste of metal fills your mouth. When you try to move, nothing happens. Your hands scrabble against the snow, finding purchase, but your legs remain heavy and unresponsive, as if they belong to someone else. The realization comes slowly, settling deeper than the cold ever could. The fight is still going on around you, but you are no longer part of it. You're not sure how much time has passed. The snow is in your mouth, in your nose, pressed cold against the skin beneath your collar. It has worked its way inside the torn seam of your tunic, melting just enough to run down your side before freezing again. You're on your back, or at least you think you are. The sky's above you, a low grey blur broken by the jagged outline of a wall leaning over your left shoulder. Your legs are twisted at an angle you can't quite understand, half buried under a drift that is already hardening with ice. You tell them to move, and they do nothing. Sound comes and goes in fragments, a burst of gunfire, close enough that the air seems to twitch around you. The heavier, slower boom of something distant, artillery perhaps, or another building giving way under the strain of months of damage. Then a lull in which the only noise is the faint hiss of snow falling through smoke. You blink slowly, the motion sluggish, as though your eyelids have grown too heavy for your face. The cold does not bite anymore. It presses instead, a weight that covers you from chest to toes, not sharp but steady, seeping into the spaces between your ribs and the hollow of your spine. You can feel the outline of each individual flake as it lands on your face, melting for an instant before the next settles on top. Your breath leaves faint clouds that drift upward before fading into nothing. You watch one dissolve against the grey sky and forget to take the next for several seconds. You are aware dimly that the line has moved on without you. Shapes pass in the edge of your vision, some hunched and hurried, others slower, bent under the weight of gear or the limp form of a man between them. No one stops. You would not either if you were in their place. The snow covers the sound of their footsteps quickly, leaving you alone with the stillness that settles after they're gone. Time loosens its grip. You close your eyes and open them again, and the light has shifted without warning. The smoke above has thinned, the grey now streaked with pale hints of the sky beyond. You think you hear a voice at one point, but when you turn your head toward it, there is nothing but the shadow of a collapsed roof and the slow drift of snow. You let your head fall back, the movement small but enough to make your vision swim for a moment before it steadies. The thought of home comes uninvited, but it is without colour or warmth. You see the shape of the street where you grew up, the angle of the fence around the yard, the line of trees that mark the edge of the fields. There are no people in it, no sound, no smell of bread or wood smoke. It is an empty place, stripped of the details that once made it real. You know you should feel something, longing, regret, maybe even relief, but there is nothing. The image fades as easily as it arrived, leaving only the colourless sky above you. Your hands are still free, and you try to lift one, if only to prove that you can. It rises a few inches from the snow before the strength drains from your arm, and it drops back, sending up a small puff of powder that settles across your chest. The rifle is gone. You cannot remember when you let it go, or if it was taken from you. You find yourself tracing the edge of your blanket with numb fingers, the fabric stiff with frost, until you lose the sensation entirely. The world narrows to the small patch of sky above you, and the slow, deliberate rhythm of your breathing. The sounds of battle, once so constant they seemed like part of the air, have grown faint. You hear them now, as if from a great distance, muted and indistinct, a low murmur that could just as easily be the wind. Snow gathers along the side of your face, soft and insulating, muffling even that. Your chest rises and falls, more slowly now, each breath an effort that feels both unnecessary and too important to stop. The air you draw in is sharp, carrying the faint scent of burned brick and the metallic tang of old blood, but you barely register it anymore. Your vision blurs at the edges, the grey sky bleeding into the darker shapes of the ruins, until you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. There is no moment of clarity, no sudden understanding, only the gradual closing in, the soft weight of the snow, the cold that is no longer cold. You feel your chest tighten once, twice, and then the movement stills. The air above you hangs undisturbed, the flakes falling in their steady, soundless rhythm, covering your face as completely as they have covered everything else in the city. The city is silent but for the wind. It threads its way through the gaps in the walls and the hollows of collapsed roofs, carrying with it the loose ash that still clings to the edges of stone. In the absence of gunfire and shell bursts, the sound seems louder, a constant whisper against the broken edges of buildings and the drifted snow that seals the streets. Smoke no longer hangs thick over the city, but it lingers in faint streaks here and there, rising from the blackened rubble of fires that burned themselves out weeks ago. The air smells cold and clean in places, sharp and sour in others, as if the ruins still breathe out what they have endured. The bodies remain where they fell. They are not moved quickly now, because there is no urgency left in this place. The lines have shifted, the fighting has moved on, and what is left behind is as fixed as the frozen ground beneath it. Snow has remade their shapes into something softer, but the contours still show. An arm bent awkwardly beneath a man's weight, a hand half buried with fingers frozen mid-gesture, a face turned upward, eyes closed, not by choice, but by ice. Their uniforms are stiff with frost, their belts and boots still in place, though those will not stay much longer. It is weeks before the work begins in earnest. The men assigned to it do not hurry, though they keep their eyes on their task. They come with carts whose wheels creak under the cold, the iron rims biting into the packed snow with every turn. Some of the carts are drawn by horses, thin and dull-eyed. Others are pushed and pulled by hand, their wooden frames groaning under the weight. The workers dress in mismatched coats and scarves, anything to keep out the wind, their boots scuffing the frozen drifts as they move from body to body. They take what can be used before lifting each man into the cart: rifles and pistols, if any remain, ammunition pouches, boots in better condition than their own, belts, gloves, caps. Sometimes the removal is brisk and without hesitation. Other times, a man will pause over a particular item, a knife with an engraving, a scarf still faintly holding its colour, before tucking it away. There is no ceremony to it, no disrespect either. It is simply the way of things now, the understanding that nothing here should go to waste. When the stripping is done, the bodies are moved with a kind of practical care. 2 men take the shoulders, 2 more the legs, and they lift in unison, the weight awkward in its stiffness. The sound is different from lifting the living. No shifting, no bend at the joints, just the dull creak of frozen cloth and the scrape of boots against the cart's edge. They stack the bodies neatly, one beside another, sometimes placing an arm or leg where it will fit to make room for more. Snow is brushed away from faces and hands, only when it interferes with the work. The carts roll slowly toward the chosen ground. It is never far from the streets where the dead were found. There is no need to move them across the whole city. The pits are dug shallow, because the earth is still hard, the top layers breaking away in jagged chunks under the blows of shovels and picks. The men doing the digging wear strips of cloth over their mouths, more for the cold than for any scent the frozen bodies might give off. They work in rhythm, the sound of metal striking earth matching the crunch of the wind-driven snow against their coats. When the pit is wide enough, the carts are backed up to its edge. The bodies are unloaded without speeches or prayers, lowered or slid in depending on the space and the angle. Sometimes they land in neat rows, sometimes they tumble into one another, limbs crossing, faces pressed into the coats of strangers. A few are covered almost immediately by the first shovelfuls of earth. Others lie exposed a little longer as the men work their way around the pit's perimeter. The snow begins to fall again, light at first, settling over the still forms before the soil can cover them entirely. No one keeps a record of names. If there were papers or tags, they have been lost or taken. The bodies are anonymous now, their stories carried only by those who might have seen them alive. And even that memory will fade as the weeks and months pass. By spring, the pit will be just another rise in the ground, marked only by the way the grass grows differently where the soil was disturbed. In time, even that will blend with the rest of the city's slow recovery or its slow decay. When the carts are empty, the men turn back to the streets. There are always more to gather. The path takes them past walls pitted with bullet holes, past the gutted shells of shops and apartments, past the hollow frames of factories whose smokestacks no longer give off anything but the occasional sigh of wind. In the distance, the faint sound of hammering marks the work of those already trying to rebuild, though the repairs are more a matter of survival than restoration. The snow thickens as the day wears on, muting the sound of the carts and softening the edges of the ruins. The workers move more slowly, their boots sinking deeper into the drifts, their breath rising in steady plumes. By the time the light begins to fail, the city is half hidden again, its sharp outlines blurred by the weather. The bodies gathered that day are in their pits, covered by a layer of soil and a deeper layer of snow, and the carts stand empty in the shadow of a collapsed warehouse. Beyond the city, the Volga lies wide and still under the winter sky. The surface is a sheet of ice broken in places where the current has pushed through, the dark water visible beneath. Along the banks, the snow lies undisturbed except for the tracks of the men who have come and gone, the wind already beginning to fill them in. The air above the river is clearer than over the city, the last threads of smoke drifting away into the dusk. The water moves slowly here, carrying with it whatever the months have left behind. A branch trapped in the thaw, a scrap of cloth caught on the edge of the ice, the faint shimmer of ash as it scatters into the current. The sound of it is low, almost hidden beneath the hush of the snow, but it is steady, unbroken, moving on as it always has. In the fading light, the river holds the sky's reflection, pale, cold and without weight, and carries it away toward a horizon where no one is watching. The smoke, the ruins, the dead themselves fade into the stillness, leaving only the slow drift of the Volga in the quiet of evening. And that brings us to the end of tonight's long cold march through a city ground to dust, where every street corner and shadow seemed to take something from you, until there was nothing left to give. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Rich Davis. Sleep well.